Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to the UX World. This episode is brought to you by Botmock. Now, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of designers over the last year and a half or so, and lucid charts gets mentioned quite often as something that people use to create conversation flows, if you like, the happy path kind of stuff, and lots of other tools as well. Draw.io gets mentioned, but the only thing with those is that they're not necessarily built for conversation design. They're built for process mapping, essentially. And a conversation isn't just a process map, it's a conversation, isn't it? So if you are using something like Microsoft Visio or Lucid Charts to create your conversational flows, then you can learn how to improve your entire design and prototyping experience for your conversational apps with Botmock. It is quite simply easier, more straightforward, fastest, and you get more control over the experience if you use a tool like Botmock rather than Lucid Charts or Microsoft Visio. Those tools weren't built for conversation design. Botmock was. Check out botmock.com/VUXworld to find out more. That's Botmock, BOTMOCK.com/VUXworld. On today's episode, we are speaking to Nico Acosta. Nico is the Director of Product and Engineering at Twilio Autopilot. Now, we've spoken about Autopilot in the past. We've had Elaine Lee on the podcast, and she was sharing some tips and some tricks in how you can build trust through dialogue and how you can build trust through crafting dialogue and designing dialogue. And we touched on the Autopilot platform, but we touched on it more from a design perspective. Today, we're going to kind of look at it in two ways. One, from a developer perspective, what's it like to actually build and develop on the Autopilot platform? But two, probably more appropriately for people who aren't developers, thinking about not just Autopilot as a tool, but thinking about your conversational strategy and thinking about your technology strategy and your architecture around your solutions. We get into some real good detail, and Nico's got some fantastic advice around building the core logic once, so you've got that in a centralized place, and then you can feed that out through each of these conversational channels. Nico's got a really great perspective on conversation design and conversational AI in general. He's not thinking about it as voice in terms of voice assistance, he's thinking about it as voice in terms of using your voice to communicate in a conversational way. We get into some really good discussions around the differences and similarities between IVR and voice, and to be honest, people kind of think down a little bit about IVRs and think that voice, if you don't design voice properly, it can be like a press one for this, press two for that. But actually, IVR systems can be quite complex, and Nico's got some real great insights into the kind of people who create IVR systems and why they're actually potentially a good fit for creating conversational experiences and voice experiences. So this one is absolutely full of strategic insight and strategic advice around how you should be kind of setting yourself up to start implementing a conversation strategy. It's really, really great. You're going to absolutely love it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nico Acosta of Twilio on VUX World.
VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. Branding with the big faces.
I love listening to it.
Kane Sims.
Kane Sims, the one and only.
Britain's finest, Mr. Kane Sims.
Dustin Coates.
I like it when you guys are together and talking about voice.
Without further ado,
Welcome to the show.
All right, let's get started. Kane, how are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Very well. How are you doing, Dustin? All right?
Doing all right. Here in Paris, heading to the US or heading to London first. We're again going to meet in person, which I'm quite excited about, and then going to be in the woods of our guest today, Nico, very soon. So want to welcome Nico Acosta from Twilio. Welcome.
Thank you, Dustin. Great to be here, and hello, everyone. Really, really excited for the conversation today, and thank you for having me.
So, Nico, you're at Twilio. You're working on Autopilot. Can you tell us a little bit more, first about yourself, and then about Autopilot?
Absolutely. So, I'm Nico Acosta. I'm the Director of Product and Engineering for the Twilio AI business unit, responsible for the Autopilot product line and kind of the underlying machine learning platform that powers all the ML that we use. A little bit about myself. I've been at Twilio since the early days. Been 7.5 years at Twilio. Had multiple roles. Most most recently, I spent 4.5 years leading the voice product line, and I should say that when we in the Twilio world, voice means telephony, and so all the grew that product line for 4.5 years. Before that, I was focused on the developer experience. And kind of general about myself, I'm a computer scientist. Good chunk of my career, I've been an entrepreneur. Started multiple companies and now leading AI at Twilio.
When you say voice and you mentioned telephony, are we still talking about the same kind of thing in terms of voice, kind of a voice interface, an automated voice interface with kind of AI in the background and natural language and all that kind of stuff? Are you talking generally any channel where someone can use their voice to communicate with anything at Twilio, even if it's a human?
Both cases, right? We see the kind of voice assistant type of interactions, kind of in the telephony world known as IVRs, kind of that are in a process of transforming themselves to be kind of from the old school touch tone, press 1 for sales, press 2 for support, to be completely conversational, to kind of person-to-person communication, where that is Uber passenger calling an Uber driver or a customer calling a company and talking to a contact center agent. So say both use cases. The kind of human to machine use case being one of the important use cases.
And has that been something that Twilio has been doing all along, the human to machine side, or did you start off really just providing these tooling for SMS, MMM, voice, human to human, and move into the human to machine side?
Yeah. So Twilio has had a kind of human to machine functionality from day one. So Twilio's a 10-year-old company since voice was the first product, and since then you could build IVRs based on touch tones. And what we've done over the last couple of years is bring all the new technologies into the world of voice, such as speech recognition, and now with Autopilot, we have like the full stack of conversational AI platform. So we've been in this space for a while. We've seen the evolution of it, and it's kind of fascinating to see how it is playing a more and more important part in all the customer engagement story for companies.
You spoke there around so coming from the IVR side of things. What would you say? We've had Simone Wilson on the podcast previously, and she is a VUI designer who comes from the kind of IVR world. So we've kind of spoke a little bit and touched a little bit on the kind of similarities or differences between designing for IVRs and things. But from your perspective, what do you think are some of the kind of the core differences in designing or creating or having an IVR system as a business versus designing or creating or having a voice presence or a voice interface somewhere as a business? What's the differences?
Yeah, so it is. There are similarities and but there are pretty important differences, and it's key to understand kind of where the different these different lines of thoughts are coming from. If you look at voice right now, a lot of the interactions are single turn, or like it's starting to get there where you have multi-turn interactions, but the most common ones are very command driven. Turn on the lights, what's the price of Bitcoin, right? Single turn interactions. In the IVR world, it is assumed that is multi-turn from the beginning, and the interaction is assumed to be task oriented from the beginning. IVRs is not something that people build for fun. They're very functional in nature, and they deal with very large volumes of users. So these are kind of multi-turn interactions from the get-go, where you're accomplishing a given task. So you'll see that the IVR folks attempt much more sophisticated conversational flows from the get-go because they have a task in mind that they want to complete that is not necessarily a single turn task.
Why do you think there is that level of sophistication on the IVR side that we're not seeing developers and designers build on the voice first side right now?
I think it's a matter of industry maturity. The IVR has been around for decades, and voice is probably the most important emerging platform, but it's fairly new, right? When you see that there are a number of professionals that when you get their email, like their signature says IVR developer, right? It's an entire ecosystem there, and businesses have had to go at this really hard because it's a very important part of scaling their customer service and their customer engagement operations. So it solves a really, really important problem for business, one that is very hard to solve, which is how to serve customers at scale with a great operational efficiency. So I think the delta you see there is not necessarily good or bad, but it's just a community having worked on a problem for quite some time.
Twilio, I think, is at an interesting intersection where you're working with those who are on the IVR side, you're working with those who are on the voice first side.
And we're working with those that are on the chatbot side as well.
Yeah. So you're really at that nexus right there. Mm-hmm. Why do you feel like there's not more overlap between those three? Certainly you do have some overlap between some people who do IVR and now are in voice first, but it feels like those are pretty separate.
They are and they're not. I wouldn't say that there's no overlap. What we see is that all these are converging. What you see for like the most forward-thinking enterprises is that they're converging these groups into a conversational AI group that owns, for example, the Alexa skill, the Google action, the IVR, and the chatbot. That's kind of what most of the forward-thinking enterprises are doing and consolidating those efforts. I always say that it's funny how when you talk to different members of the community, if you talk to the IVR crowd, they're excited about Alexa and they're excited about messaging. When you talk to the chatbot crowd, they're excited about voice. and those are kind of signs that tell you like all this is converging. And we really, when we thought about Autopilot as a platform, that is something that is super core to how we build and design the product. Is we do believe that these are going to converge, and we do believe that companies will benefit from decoupling the intelligence layer from channel-specific implementations.
Interesting. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit for those who may not necessarily be as deep into this as we've spoke in a similar fashion to this in terms of separating content from logic and stuff like that. But do you want to elaborate a little bit on what you mean from separating the intelligence from the channel?
Yeah. So when you think about any consumer-based business, there's probably between 100 and 200 reasons why customers contact them, right? And some of the hardest ones some of the hardest things that, like, yes, there's like some top reasons, but the long tail is pretty beefy and pretty long. So it's like not that obvious to automate. So you actually need to tackle those 200 things and to tackle them well. And obviously conversational AI is a prime tool to do this, whatever the channel is, whether you're interacting through a chatbot, through a 1-800 number, through an Alexa app. And you want to build that model of like those 200 reasons why people call you, train them, extract the relevant data and the relevant fields from it. You want to build that once and not have to build and maintain in 5 different tools for each specific channel. Like the AI actually gets much better when it sees a breadth of examples. Even if they come from different channels, people will say things in a different way depending on the modality and the channel itself, but that makes the AI stronger. And the other thing that is important is that you want to make sure that you're building that AI layer in a way that is future proof, that will let you react to what's going on in the market. Today, if you look back the last decade or two, channels were fairly static. You had like website, the mobile app, the phone, or you could show up in person. But now there's channel explosion, and the different channels have different values for the businesses depending on the geography, on the target demographic, and a lot of the times on the use case itself. So you want to be able to react to that and support all different channels. And now we have WhatsApp business chat and Apple business chat and RBM, and who knows what's going to come next, and who knows what use cases those channels are going to be best at. So having a platform where you can deploy those and leverage your intelligence layer so you don't have to fragment it is critically important. And the other thing I believe is going to happen is that the messaging channels are going to start to become voice enabled as well. You see it a little bit on the kind of Google Assistant app, where like you can text or write. So same point as the beginning. All these are converging, and it's, if you have that decoupled from the channel, you can leverage your investments in AI much better and move at a faster speed.
What then does Twilio offer to allow this decoupling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we offer, you can think about Twilio in a couple of different layers. The first layer is Twilio. We are a communications API platform that enables developers to build and integrate communications into any application. So we offer APIs and platforms for every modality of communication, whether that's voice telephony, video, SMS, any kind of messaging channel like WhatsApp and that stuff, email. But then on top, we offer the core here is Autopilot that connects to every single channel, but is a conversational AI platform that lets you train your models and then connect them to the channel, whether they're Twilio channels or not. You can also implement your own channel if you have, for example, if we don't support it natively yet, or you're building a custom built chat or a custom built voice assistant, you can integrate it as well.
And so walk us through that. Let's say I wanted to use Autopilot, because I want to be on all of those different platforms and I want to do that decoupling. How would I go about starting that?
Yeah, and here I'll talk a little bit about kind of where we started the conversation on why is this different, and I'll talk a little bit about how Autopilot is different than a lot of the conversational AI platforms you see out there, and a little bit our philosophy on why we built it this way. The core building block of Autopilot are tasks, and the tasks represent what the user wants to accomplish. So the first thing that you do where you're building with Autopilot is define the task, which is what does the user need to do. Could be as simple as, hey, what's the price of Bitcoin? That is a single turn task, or it could be a much more complex task, like I want to get a car insurance quote. That is a fairly complex task, but we believe that, kind of going back to the single and multi-turn applications, we believe that like intents are not the right building block to build sophisticated conversational applications. These intents are inherently single tasks. You can make it like single turn. You can make it multi-turn with some slot filling, but then for every single case, you need to create a different intent, and that complicates the business modeling significantly. You need to create an intent for kind of every case. With Autopilot, you create tasks, and then that task, you program it to have 1 or 2 or 3 or multiple turns where it's asking for information, it's asking you questions, it's giving you information back, and it's making decisions on whether on what to show you next. So it's completely dynamic. To give you an example, if you say, I need to get car insurance, the first question might be, are you buying a new or a used car? Right? And that could render completely different questions. It's like buying a new car. Okay, great. You don't need to ask for the year because you know it's new, right? So what's the make? What's the model? Give me like the registration number, all the stuff that you need. If it's used, you need to capture a bunch of different data. And that's kind of how you go about building with Autopilot. And Autopilot's different than the rest of the problems in that the core construct that we use to build conversations are tasks, not kind of single turn intents. If that makes sense.
Wouldn't you have to, so for an intent, let's take that insurance example. If the intent is to take out a policy, and then all of the things that you just said there in terms of, is it a new car, is it a used car, would they be slots? I'm just trying to establish what the difference is between a task and an intent.
Yeah, so they could, but then in the example where type of car, new or used, right? And then you want to have conditional logic after that and ask different questions after that. And then you want to have other set of questions and ask and execute your logic. And you want that to be completely dynamic. So at task, the main difference is that slots, you need to define them up front, right? You need to define them on like whatever tool, build the model and everything. With tasks, you don't need to define what you're asking up front. You can think about it as a dynamic form, right? Like how you would build a website. Like you have like one field, based on that field, you make a business logic decision, render some other fields, you fill them up, you send them over, make a business logic decision, send some other fields, right? So it lets you implement like all these business workflows that are conditional on the information that you collect first, and you don't need to have all that configured up front.
You still need to define that though, wouldn't you? You would still need to define that process, that business process, if you like. Would you need to do a little bit of defining up front so that you can determine where you should route stuff?
You need to, so how a task is programmed is with Autopilot actions. And these are seven actions where you can say stuff, you can ask questions, you can collect data from users, you can show. So if the device has a visual display, you can redirect to another task or webhook out to your URL. You can remember so that you build a context. So if you say, you can remember everything that a user says so that you can use it later in the dialogue. And you can hand off to a human agent. So those are the core actions. But the difference is that this is a kind of request response webhook model. So when an action gets invoked, when I say, I want to buy car insurance, we webhook out to your server. Your server takes all the context of the conversation that you have at that point and renders a JSON similar to how it would render an HTML on a website with these actions. The user goes, answers those questions, and it webhooks out again. Your business logic does whatever it needs to do, and then it renders a new set of instructions. And all this is within the car insurance, the get car insurance quote task. So this way, you do not need to define all the fields up front. It could be dynamic, which is a huge thing, which is kind of like how the web works, right? Depending on the car that you're going to buy, if it's a luxury car, you might need to ask some questions. If you're getting insurance in one country, it might be some questions. If it's in a different country, it might be another set of questions for like regulatory issues and who knows what, right? A lot of this stuff is very dynamic based on the business logic. And with Autopilot, since all these are generated by your app, you can build fairly sophisticated conversational flows on a task and have like multiple steps of natural language understanding on all these different stages of a task. And then at the end, you kind of complete that car insurance and you can do something else.
Then to perhaps put it in a visual perspective, what you have here are you have the task, and the tasks are performing actions. Is that correct?
That's correct. That is correct. And then the actions are generated by your server. So we webhook out, fetch a JSON that has those actions, and kind of that interaction can go on and on and on and on.
So the conversation is designed in Autopilot, but everything that feeds into it in terms of what you need to get from the user as part of that conversation comes from an external API.
Yes, you design the basic schema of the tasks, right? Of like, I want to get car insurance, I want to check my application status or check my claim status, right? But then how you build those tasks is completely dynamic. One of the things that we see a lot is, and it is the same principle that we use at Twilio for pretty much all of our products, is that you drive the interaction from where your business logic lives. Like a lot of these decisions of what to ask and where to go from a given point in the dialogue, they are business logic driven, and it requires the context that you have in your application. It requires you to know that that a used car has these requirements, or that a new car has these requirements. So what we do is that we make it really easy for you to generate that reusing any web application or any API that you have to generate those conversational flows.
And then who's building this ultimately? Is it devs only tool, or is it something where devs are responsible for something, you've got designers responsible for another thing? Who's ultimately putting this together?
Yeah, so this is a product for developers. So developers are building these flows. In some cases, they have some level of design depending on the sophistication, but these are developers building the flows.
Okay. You mentioned there that earlier on you were talking about different channels having different requirements and different use cases and contexts and stuff like that. And then if the logic is handled via the kind of back end system, the line of business system or whatever, and every channel has its own kind of context, how do you go about creating that core logic if different channels require something slightly different? If you want to build it once and have all of the AI and the logic and all of that kind of like the brain, if you like, in one place, yet individual channels may require something kind of different. How do you approach that?
Yeah, so I think there are channels that are best suited for different types of tasks. And I'll give you a couple of examples, and it depends on what the customer experience is at that point. If you follow, for example, like the insurance example, if you get into an accident, you're most likely going to call, right? And when you call, you want an experience where like you get a hold of a human really, really quickly, and that's like kind of one type of experience. But if you have a minor issue and then you file a claim to get your car fixed, and when you have a claim, it's kind of like something pretty top of mind that's going on in your life, right? There's like, oh God, did this claim get approved? I need to get this through, right? That's when like those type of use cases are really well suited for Alexa or for Google Assistant, where it's like, hey Alexa, what's the status of my claim? Right? You're asking that 3 times a day, right? And so that's what I mean, where different channels are very better suited for different use cases. If you call on the phone and ask the same thing will work. But the key for like a good strategy is kind of learning what use cases to leverage on which channel, and not assume that all the channels are equal. Like the check insurance, check the status claim is kind of like super, super easy, super convenient to do. It's even easier than taking your phone and looking at the app, right? It's like it cannot get more convenient. But identifying what are those kind of top use cases by channel and kind of prioritizing those. But that doesn't mean that if you text or if you call in any other channel, it won't work. There is a component that you touched on earlier that is the separation of kind of the programming and the content, right? And then the content in a platform like Autopilot can be, you do get the channel that the user is interacting. So like you can customize different content for different channels. So if like the tolerance for voice users to listen to long text is very low, right? But if you're texting, you can send a bunch of stuff. It's like it'll be there, right? And you don't need to remember it. So you customize that and handle and tune the experience that way. But I think the most important point is kind of identifying from a user experience and a convenience perspective, what is the experiences that we want to push for each platform.
Do you then have guidelines, especially for people who are entering these new spaces, where you can say, this is the kind of thing that is well geared towards this platform, this is the kind of thing that's well geared towards other platforms? Or is it more getting out and speaking with their customers and it's on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, so I would say that it's still early. I think we're putting having guidelines, stuff like that, something that we want to do as we see these patterns with more clarity. And that right now it is early. We see a lot of experimentation. We see a lot of people trying to solve a bunch of different problems, and it's now more of a customer by customer basis. But we do start seeing a lot of patterns across all the deployments.
What are some of those patterns? Is that what we've just been talking about in terms of maybe customizing content for different channels, or is there any other patterns that you've noticed that may feed into some of this best practice or guidelines?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Anything that has a well-defined workflow is a very good candidate to automate. But perhaps the strongest pattern that we're seeing is around, or strongest use case that we're seeing is around everything around scheduling. Like we're seeing that across industries, scheduling stuff, scheduling appointments, calls, visits, and then managing that. and our autopilot's really well suited for that because it has what we call built-in fields that give you like the natural language understanding on dates, times, locations, and that's one thing that we're saying that is very interesting for, see, one of the biggest things across all industries is automating that scheduling process. So if it's in the financial sector, scheduling, like talking to a financial advisor. If it's in the automotive industry, scheduling a test drive. If it's obviously in healthcare, there's plenty of scheduling to be done there. So that's, I would say, one of the strongest patterns we see.
Beyond scheduling, what are some of the applications that people and companies are building on autopilot today?
Yeah, so a couple of things. There's a lot of folks building kind of question answering, and these are not like discrete use cases. A lot of use cases have kind of one or all of these types of things that I'm going to talk about. Question answering. So, for example, we have one use case is deployed on Alexa as the city of Lake Forest, doing frequently and infrequently asked questions for citizens. So people that want to ask like how to report a graffiti or what to do if my garage is blocked, and a bunch of stuff like that, doing that question answering and improving engagement. And these are single turn answers, but the breadth of them, it makes it super valuable. The other thing that we see a lot is lead qualification. So handling inbound leads, qualifying them is like, how big is your company? Are you over 1,000 people? What industry you are? Do you have the budget for this? Like whatever the qualification questions are. And then that plugs into our broader infrastructure where you can route those calls or route those messages appropriately based on whatever answers you got. So lead qualification is an important one.
With the lead qualification, you mean if I needed my windows replaced, I might call in and say, hey, I need my windows replaced. They ask if it's for a house or a business, and they're going to route me based on which of those and perhaps how much money I can bring them ultimately. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, and this applies across industries, right? But industry-wise, we're seeing use cases in travel for reservation management. We're seeing use cases in government, like the city of Lake Forest, in real estate, in retail, both e-commerce and kind of physical retail. We're seeing use cases in finance, kind of pretty much across the board. Which is expected from like a broad and horizontal platform. We're not a customer support bot platform, or we're not a sales bot platform. Since the beauty about being a platform is that you empower developers to build, and you do all this. You give them all these building blocks, and they can assemble those building blocks in so many different ways that, like, some of the ways that some of the things that they come up with are truly incredible. Some of the use cases are expected, like I don't know, the scheduling is like not super surprising, but I've definitely seen some that are fairly creative, I would say.
What are some examples of those?
I think one of my favorites is a company that does websites for small businesses. And these are like truly small businesses, maybe businesses that are where the owner does not have internet, right? Think like a taco truck or stuff like that. And they built this autopilot bot where you call in and then they ask you a bunch of questions, what industry you're on. They ask you, for example, if you're on Yelp or not. They ask you your location. And with, I think it's like 10 questions, they create a website for you. It's just like, wow, I had never, like, we thought really hard about the use cases when we were building the product, but like, we never imagined a voice-driven kind of website builder.
Wow. What? So somebody would call this number, answer these 10 questions, and the output of that phone call would be a website generated for them based on that call.
Yeah.
Wow.
Is that audited, or is that being handed off to someone else who's ultimately building the website?
No, it's automated. Wow. And then once it's live, you can go in and change some things, but it gives you, like, at the end of the flow, it gives you a working website, which is pretty incredible. And it sends you an SMS with a link, and like, so you see this type of things, and like, that's really what really inspires us here at Twilio when you see all the new use cases, and sometimes these use cases end up being really, really big, and we end up kind of uncovering new parts of the market. And that's the beauty of platforms.
And Nico, when you're daydreaming and you're thinking about, man, I just wish somebody would do this on Twilio and I would just be happy I'd be able to retire. What is your dream implementation using Twilio?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, when I talk to people and talk to customers, one of the thing that I hear the most is that I've never heard anybody that likes waiting on hold, and it's probably like the worst customer experience possible, which is, I am giving you my full attention and the business is telling me to wait. Right? And then on the other hand, businesses pay millions and millions of dollars on advertising to get my attention, and I'm there giving them my attention and you're not paying attention to me. It's like such a huge contradiction. So when I think about if you take a complex business like the travel or the banking industry, right, where you can actually do complex tasks through voice. And I don't know if you've ever lost an international wire transfer, but it's not fun. If you lose an international wire transfer, it is rocket science to find it. And like, if you call in, the frontline agent can't help you, the supervisor can't help you. Like, you need to make it all the way to like the FX desk to find it. Like, how you know, what we dream is being able to tackle these complex cases where everything can be self-service, because customers actually prefer self-service if it's possible. And sometimes you do want humans. Say if you crash your rental car, you want business to have that empathy and connect you with a human. But if it's a consumer preference to have a self-service experience, being able to offer no matter what complexity there is in the background. And we believe that to offer a simple experience for customers dealing with all that complexity in the background, you need really good platforms that are easy to integrate and easy to model, so that you can leverage all the applications in the background. I think in the future, we'll have to go to more of how like the enterprise is talking about the robotic process automation and navigate all the old school enterprise apps and get the information from wherever it is and bring it to the user in a convenient way. But that's the kind of the ultimate goal, that every customer engagement is smart, that every customer engagement is being able to is self-service, and ultimately that's a great experience. I'd say the change that's going to drive the industry in the next 5 years is pretty dramatic, and companies know that they need to step up their game, and that they cannot keep their customers on hold for much longer.
Nico, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you? Where can people find more about Twilio and Autopilot? Awesome.
Well, Dustin, Kane, thank you so much for having me. You can find me on Twitter. I'm Acosta with double S, ACOSSTA. And you can learn more about Autopilot at twilio.com/autopilot.
Fantastic. Nico, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Great talking to you guys.
That was Nico Acosta of Twilio. What an ending that was. The dream for using Twilio is to get rid of people being on hold on calls. Such a good point. People spend millions of pounds trying to capture people's attention, and what do they do when they get that attention? They put you on hold. Everyone's bugbear. Really, really good. What I liked about that is that we spoke previously to Elaine Lee. She's also at Twilio. And we spoke to Elaine about the design side, but it was really good to jump kind of upper level to the kind of more broader business side to figure out how Twilio would advise you to go ahead and implement a conversational AI as part of your business. And I really like Nico's thinking on creating that core brain, and this is not necessarily a new concept. We've come across this in many different places before and spoke to many different people who've said something very similar, which is that create the core brain, the core logic, the core AI centrally, and then use that to distribute throughout all of your conversational channels. And I love the way that Nico's approaching this, not from a voice perspective necessarily, but from a conversational perspective, in terms of it doesn't matter whether or not you use the phone, doesn't matter whether or not you use WhatsApp, doesn't matter whether or not you use Alexa. It's all a similar experience and the same kind of experience that feeds through at the same back end. So you've got consistency across all channels, and you've got a presence on all of those channels, and then it becomes just about what interface is the right interface for the right kind of task for the user at any given time. Really, really good observations. Thank you so much, Nico, for joining us on this one. Thank you, Dustin, as always, boys and girls, thank you all for listening. Until next time, see you later.